myself and how I got here. So I was born and raised in South Florida. I am the son of Cuban immigrants. My dad came when he was almost 17. My mom followed when she was 18. And because they were both in the same place, I followed 9 months after that. And lived here most of my life because I love my community. And I think it's a wonderful place. Went to high school here, went to college here, went to university here, went to law school here. I went to Henry M. Flagler, Kinloch Kindergarten. I went to Olympia High School, I went to Glen Jesuit. I went to Notre Dame, and I went to UM and University. Anyway, so this is my community. I love it. And I love the fact that it is such a different community. And one of the wonderful things about this community is precisely that it is becoming what the nation will be. Right? So if you think about our country, right? If I say to you, think of a city in the 20s, you think Chicago, right? If I say to you, think about a city in the 60s and 70s, you generally think of Los Angeles, right? That was the city that designed it. If you think of the 90s, you think of Seattle coffee culture and that thing. And so 100 years from now, they will talk about this period of time. And they will think about this place where we are. Because what we are doing here is making the next generation of the modern American city. It is highly immigrant. It is a changing, dynamic workforce. It is incredibly diverse. And that's what we're doing here. And the reason this has all been able to happen here first, rather than other cities, is that we have an immigration system, for lack of a better word, that in Miami worked to some degree because it was so lax. Right? And I don't want to get into the whole 9 yards. We need an immigration system. I'm a big believer of it. But Cuban Americans have an exceptional rule. And Haitians had exceptional circumstances. And so you had this wave of refugees that came in, and yeah, they had a lot of bars and stuff, but they were able to get through it. I mean, if a Cuban makes it to the beach, he's on his way to citizenship. And the reality is it created a tremendous dynamic place. And, you know, it's a great story that they once asked Jean Kirkpatrick to write a history of immigrants. And she turned back and she said, no, the history of America is the history of immigrants, right? It's the other way around. And so I believe that what we're doing here is tremendously important. And believe it or not, my first job out of school was processing Cuban refugees. There were tens of thousands of Cuban refugees stranded across the world. I come from a middle-class family, so we hadn't traveled much. And they gave me money and resources, and I traveled through 15 different countries processing Cuban refugees and bringing them to the United States. People who had been stranded in other countries and couldn't get asylum in those countries. So I am the beneficiary of an incredibly generous immigration system. Okay? So where we are today. Let me go back a little bit. Where we were. So when I got elected to Congress, I had a very important goal, which is to try to get comprehensive immigration reform done. I was fortunate enough that Nancy Pelosi let me be the lead sponsor on the immigration bill. I would love to tell you that I crafted that entire bill all by myself in my apartment. That isn't what happened, right? This was a compromise piece of legislation, which, if some of you who are experts read, is rather draconian, right? It is not generous. It is not particularly expansive, but it took a stab at beginning a problem. And always, the key to everything is getting started. And that was what this bill was. Let's get this done because we then deal with the mass, and then there are little pockets that we can take care of after, which I think would have been very possible. All this understanding that, while this wouldn't solve all of the problem, it solved a huge part of it, and then allowed us to deal outside of all. Let us deal with things legally, right? Which I think what would have followed, which would have been laws that give immigration judges much more latitude, so that they can act on the interests of the country. What would have followed is, I think, rules that would have made it easier in certain parts of the world to immigrate. What would have followed is paperwork requirements that became simpler. But to get this done, we had to find a way to make it harsh enough so that Republicans, which controlled the House and Senate, would be willing to do it. It didn't happen, right? They talked and talked. I think Boehner talked about doing it, and it never got done. So we skipped forward 2 years, worked really hard while I was doing it, skipped forward 2 years, and we're at this again. What I believe is that we are going to get comprehensive immigration reform done early in the next presidential administration of Hillary Clinton. I'm a believer that she's going to win, and I'm a believer that the Democrats are going to take the Senate, and we're going to come much closer in the House. Who knows, if Trump continues this trajectory, we may actually take the House, but let's not bet too much on that. So let's say we don't take the House. I do think we begin with a baseline discussion that will be much more favorable. I think that the debate that we will have will move to the left of the comprehensive immigration bill that we had forward. And I think we'll also look at it systematically, how to deal with these problems going forward. I'll give you an example. I think when the president did DACA, which I was very supportive of, and DAPA, which what he gave us because we couldn't get immigration reform done. I want to be clear. My opponent on the Republican side opposed DAPA and helped file the motion that went against DAPA. I believe in DAPA, and I think DAPA would have been a good mid-step for us to deal with this problem. So this is where we find ourselves, right? And so going forward, I'm a big believer that after this election, there's probably going to be a meeting of the minds, believe it or not, even with Republicans, to have a serious discussion to get this off the table, because it's an existential threat to their existence as a party. Forget about country first, because I don't think they think in those terms anymore. But it's just about their ability to win elections going forward. There are states which you are going to see play a huge role precisely on this. And without adding too much to the debate, because I think we can talk about it later, I also think that this election is an important time for immigrants, non-citizen immigrants, people who are still here undocumented, to try to help in this process. When I've had campaigns in the past, we work with volunteers from all different communities to try to have impact. And if you believe the law should change, this election, more than any other, you have a stark choice. One party is for you, one party wants to deport you. And I think in that construct, that should be relatively simple for all of us to understand, and we should use that. And I'm going to talk too much, so let me just say that as a start.
Well, thank you for your optimism. I'm not sure I share the same optimism, but we'd like, actually, we have a few questions that we prepared for you.
Okay.
And then we're going to allow, throw it open for other people to ask questions. The first question is really a follow-up on your presentation on immigration reform, and Maria Rodriguez from the Florida Marine Coalition is going to ask it.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here and to the discussion. I think you actually made reference to the question, which was, what do you think can happen in the first 100 days, given where we're at, and what should we do to push forward?
So let me tell you what we should do. I'm a believer that people who think of this problem, we had someone from the Haitian Lawyers Association here, we have you from We Count, we have a lot of people here who think about this. We should use some convening force to have a meeting with people who can begin a framework. The Catholic Church, for example, should, I don't want to use the word conclave because it's not the correct word, but should call together a lot of the sort of legal participants in this to have a discussion of what comprehensive immigration reform should look like that has a Christian spirit of generosity. I don't want to sound like a right-winger but
Thanks.
the Catholic Church on this issue, even though I'm a Roman Catholic, has been particularly visionary. And unlike on other policy where I might have a disagreement, part of the driving force in the Catholic Church is the strength it derives from the immigrant community. If you look at urban center Catholic churches, today they are not populated by anyone but Hispanics, right? Churches that were dying have come back, pews have filled, and so they have an interest, a vested interest in making their congregation stronger and thereby making the country stronger, but at the same time trying to have the Christian generosity that it counts. You know, one time that I found fascinating was when they had that first big immigration rally in Washington. I think it was 2007, if I'm not mistaken, where Kennedy spoke, or 2008, was it? 2006?
Kennedy spoke? Oh, I wasn't there then.
Yeah, no. So it was a real big one, the first one that was organized by
2010?
yeah, no, there was one earlier, and it was when Gutierrez was running lead on immigration, 2007. And it was fascinating. It was a huge crowd. Of course, they had not expected those numbers because they didn't feel them, they didn't see them. And the crowd only quieted down for two people that spoke. One was when the bishop spoke, and the other one was when Kennedy spoke. The rest of the time there was chatter the whole time because it was just a huge crowd. But I do believe, going back to your question, is we have to use the interim before a session described to come up with some basic legal constructs that we can put into some legislation to work forward. Because I think the legislation we did before, while it was a yeoman's task to bind together people who are adverse to immigration, began from a bad place, right? We took a broken system and tried to niddle around all the little issues to get it to move forward, as opposed to, here's a problem, how do we deal with it? And I want you to, I want to put this into context. This will probably get me in trouble because certain of my opponents are filming me here, but we have an immigration problem. No, he's with me. He's the only one I can control the video. Well, we may have 11 million, give or take. It depends, right? If you cite Trump, we're at about 45. But if you look at the real number, somewhere between 11 and 12. What we know is even if we were to legalize comprehensive immigration reform, we still need, in the next decade, about another 8 million to meet worker requirements in the country. Just it's a natural progression, simply to take care of our aging, for the healthcare industry, for workers that the country's going to need. So we need a functioning system. So I believe that after this election, if the election comes out the way I hope it does, we should begin anew. And that doesn't mean that you throw everything out, but all the people who've pushed for this, all the people who've talked about it, have an opportunity to do the right thing and put forward something that makes sense and that sets us on the path going forward. But you shouldn't begin from the place of compromise. You should begin from the place of how do I make an immigration system that works, as opposed to take an existing immigration system, which is a lot of little things being stuck on, that is dysfunctional by its very nature. And I think we can do that. And I think the country is ready for it. I think the vast majority of Americans believe that. And we have to understand that it's also going to require border enforcement, worker ID requirements, because it's necessary. But it begins as a way to take care of our bigger problem.
Thank you, Joe. This kind of begs for some follow-up questions,
Sure.
But I think we're going to go on to some other questions. If everyone can keep in mind some of the questions that they'd like to ask, because I think this is a very interesting and expansive answer that requires a lot of details.
Sure.
I think. But let's move on to some of the other questions, and we'll come back to your questions at the end, and hopefully we can flesh this out a little bit more. I want to introduce actually another of the groups that's sponsoring this forum, which is United Families, is also here. But the next question is going to come from Vanessa Joseph from the Haitian Lawyers Association.
I actually also work for Catholic Legal Services,
There you
and
go.
so I do have a burning follow-up question, but I will hold it if I must.
If you want to go ahead with the burning
Go ahead.
follow-up
Well,
question,
okay,
it's,
so on our board